Buenos días, buenas tardes, y buenas noches. Bonjour, bonsoir, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you may be. Jay Slater case. And today we turn to the big news from yesterday, and that was, of course, that Ayub Kasim's wife, Paige Cheri Crisp, was found guilty along with the other two defendants that were on trial in Birmingham for smuggling of cannabis, I think it was, well, mass smuggling of cannabis, enormous quantities, from Thailand via Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport and into Birmingham Airport. So this was a trial that happened in Birmingham. It concluded yesterday, and the verdict was all three defendants, who I believe were, apart from Ayub's wife, Paige Cheri Crisp, Tasia Nelson, I think her name was, also guilty, and Jaden, someone also guilty. So I'm not going to go all into the background of it. It's one of those cases where, I mean, there is a lot of detail. Of course, there's 11, I think, different people on trial. Well, no, there's 11 smugglers involved. Don't hold me to the number and exact detail. I think there's 11 smugglers involved. The majority of them pled guilty. So there's a small number that actually went to court. And this group of three were tried together, if you like, and all three found guilty. So that was the focus. My main comment here is I don't know who advised them to go with not guilty. It's a difficult one when you effectively have 11 smugglers all on the same flight, all arriving with the same merchandise, let's say, and the majority say, yeah, I'm guilty, and then the others are saying, well, I'm not, and I'm going to fight this in court. I don't know. My message is, I think the writing was on the wall. The writing was on the wall for these three. The very second their co-conspirators pled guilty. But anyway, they went ahead. They were tried. They were found guilty. Um, and I believe, in a strange kind of way, I think that's a carbon copy of what happened to Ayub way back when he was charged for his narco dealing. I believe in his case, others pled guilty, and with the misplaced bravado, we could say, or the arrogance. Mr. Ayub, Mr. Patience himself, went ahead with not guilty and, for his sins received a longer sentence. That's how it goes. But anyway, guilty, guilty, guilty. Now, before I start reading the notes that I have on this, the other comment I want to make is that I'm sure you all remembered we in the foul play group were being lectured to over and over again by the accident group, but in particular by Chris Pennington, who was throwing his hands up saying, you lot, when you talk about the likes of Ayub and you talk about the likes of Rocky, you talk as if they are some kind of criminal, So Chris Pennington's point, they've done their time, they've served their time, they're out. And Pennington actually said they haven't committed a crime since then, but he wouldn't know that. He wouldn't know that at all. Maybe Pennington meant they haven't been arrested, charged, and convicted of a crime since then, but I would assume there's a high likelihood that between Rocky being released from his latest prison stint, whenever that was, and Ayub, I would imagine that a fair amount of crime had been committed by them. That's just my guess. But I do remember being lectured to and said, "Yeah, you are ruining." That was the phrase Pennington used. You are ruining people's lives, pointing the finger and talking about them in this way. Well, does so happen, Chris Pennington, in the fullness of time, that to all intents and purposes, even though El Slugtardo keeps calling this very reliable court data site, what is it, New Court Data UK or something, uh, even though it's a reliable site and Luggy calls it a scamming fake, the information is given us on Stephen Rockus's charges seem to hold water. Now we've got Ayub's wife convicted. I don't know, Chris Pennington. I don't know, Chris Pennington. Is it a fair assumption to say at some point Ayub too will be looking over his shoulder? And what I will make, the point I will make in this video is that this might be the moment when Ayub should be looking over his shoulder based on the evidence that was given in his wife's trial. We'll get to that now. Now, first of all, shout out to Lee, because follower Lee was the first person that said he had actually gone to the court way at the, I think it was day one, right at the very beginning, gave a brief description of the three defendants, what they looked like. Lee didn't have, too much time to go into detail, but he was our first person in there. And since that time, another person who wants to remain anonymous, and that makes perfect sense, let's call it Person X, has been following and has been in court, not every day, of course, and has kept notes. And that's what I intend to read out today. So you get a feel for what was going on in this trial, and get to know some detail that may or may not bear fruit in future as we think about Ayub and the J. Slater case. So, without any more ado, I think the best way to do this is just for me to read out the notes of my follower, Person X, who took notes during court session and afterwards, and actually was the one that told me yesterday when the verdict had come through. If you remember yesterday, I very tentatively said word on the street is that Ayub's wife has been found guilty, and then it did appear, I think, Facebook, the national crime agency, they reported it. But anyway, um, proud to say that because of my follower here, I think we were the first on social media, or one of the first, to put it out there. Anyway, without more ado, let me pull up these notes. Hi Duncan, I ran out of time to tidy this up, but these are my notes. On trial, Paige Cheri Crisp, Tasia Nelson, and Jaden Rahman. Now, when Lee went into court, I think he was the one that described Jaden as a kind of Rocky lookalike, but he had the long braided hair, impeccably dressed. And as we read through these notes, you'll see that Person X has also said Jaden, impeccably dressed and very quiet, seemed to be the well-behaved one. Tasia Nelson, I think, is from Newquay, Cornwall, because that name has popped up when I've looked through press reports from there. And Paige Cheri Crisp, of course, from Malvern, Worcestershire. Ayub's wife, and I say Ayub's wife, I'm not 100% convinced. It might be wife through some kind of Thai temple ceremony. I don't know. Might be official wife and registered in the UK. I don't know. But my follower here, Person X, did a bit of research into Paige Cheri Crisp, but it does look like Paige Cheri Crisp does have a side of her family, looking at her social media profiles, that is Muslim. So those of us were saying, oh, good God, white girl from Malvern marrying Ayub and becoming Islamic, becoming Muslim. I'm not 100% convinced that that is the case. I do think my follower here has got this right, that Paige Cheri Crisp might be one of those that has, some Muslim family members. But anyway, I can do a separate video on that. I'm just saying, I think Paige Cheri Crisp is not one of those that has just been, if you like, suckered into some kind of marriage with Ayub. I think there may be some family or friend connection in the background there. I'm just guessing, just guessing. Okay, back on course with the notes here from Person X. Witnesses, police officer A and B. A is a manager. It was noted here, hard to hear him. Didn't catch either of the names or long-winded job titles. And police officer B was a senior manager in charge of the strategic direction of the operation. All right. As I say, these notes are based on when Person X was listening to the police evidence, because that really was, I think, the focus I wanted, is what was presented in court that gave us information on how this operation went. How did these police officers discover all the evidence, bring it forward, and that was what we were looking for here. Trial commenced late, shortly after 11 a.m. due to overruns with two unrelated cases before. Just a second. Let me go back and find the notes on witness A. Okay, witness A. The morning was a continuation from the previous day, which was reading through the statement of Tasia Nelson. It recommenced from the point of what happened at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. There was a brief recap from Thailand that Tasia, Jaden, and Paige had met the men briefly at the airport in Thailand. Now, I'm guessing these are the men that gave them the packages. All three, that is Tasia, Jaden, and Paige, had agreed to take what they believed to be packages of cigarettes in their suitcases. At this point, it was as if they had randomly been asked to put the packages in their bag at the airport at check-in. Okay, so our follower here says that's what it sounded like, the way they spoke about it. Tasia had explained that they expected just a couple of boxes of cigarettes in their suitcases. She didn't know what to expect, as it was her first time doing this. The notes continue. She then threw Paige, Ayub's wife, Paige, under the bus and said, unlike Paige, who had done it many times before. I'm kind of smiling at this because I just can't imagine poor Paige there thinking, when I get to speak, I'm going to say this, that, and the other. And her comrade in arms here, Tasia, saying, yeah, I was new to this. I didn't know what was going on. I thought it'd be just a couple of cartons of cigarettes. It was my first time. Unlike her over there, Paige, she's done it loads of times, so I'm the one that didn't know what was going on. Wow. I guess these two aren't going to be friends behind bars. Exactly. Let me go back to the notes. The initial interview doesn't tie into the fact that it had been planned, as her statement implies they randomly bumped into these people at the airport. Yeah, as one always does, bumping into people that say, can you take this through for me? Presumably from the day before, the CCTV didn't match this as they had arrived at the airport with huge, heavy suitcases after a 4 or 5 day holiday. The bags were so heavy, the men that arranged the bag swap had to take the large suitcases for them part of the way to check in. All right, well, sounds like, I don't know, some people do travel like that. I was just going to say, the whole large suitcase, I never do. Some people do. If you can't walk with that huge suitcase to check in, you're taking something you shouldn't be taking anywhere. But apparently, this is what happened. Massive suitcases taken to check in. Now, this part was a bit blurred. Remember, person X here is talking about the CCTV. This part was a bit blurred as it referred back to luggage swap in a hotel room, and the language used by Tasia was very vague, and she kept changing her account of who she was in contact with as soon as she had said a name. Tasia had explained that the only people she saw at the airport were Jordan and another, then 4 black men, and the only thing she could think was that they all had turkey teeth. She followed Jaden's lead and went everywhere he went. Now, I want to pause there. Is it that outrageous to say that if Paige is involved with this Thailand to UK cannabis smuggling operation, if Ayub's wife is involved, that it's likely that Ayub is involved? He might not be. Gotta say, you do have to think this could be solely Paige's operation and her husband doesn't even know about it? Unlikely. Okay. You've got to think maybe this is Paige's operation and her husband Ayub knows about it but is very much against the idea and has tried to talk her out of it. I don't know. As one wag said on my channel earlier this morning, you would have thought that, I would have set his wife up for life with his brilliant crypto schemes and his railway construction and tunnels company. But no, I'm going to make a guess here that Ayub not only knew about Paige's involvement on all this, but that he's involved. And the reason I think he might be involved is we do know, fairly sure, he's been in Thailand up to something or other. And yeah, 4 black men. 4 black men. The only thing she could think was they all had turkey teeth. I don't know. I don't know. How many would you say in Bangkok airport, black men from the UK? Doesn't say they're from the UK, but they're all communicating with these UK-based people with turkey teeth. I would have thought there's a high probability that one of them could be Ayub Kassim. But I don't know. I'm just saying that is my speculation, allegedly. Anyway, signal group name. What is this all about? I think this is about how they communicated with each other through a platform or an app called Signal. I never heard of it. Let me read on. Tasia managed to confuse the police as she referred to Donnie and Ziggy, I think. One of them turned out to be Jordan, who they followed. It was just he had set up an account to contact them, but rather than being an account for one person, it turned out to be an account that a few of the people who organised the couriers to them contacted them on, but it had the appearance of being from one individual. When they got to Birmingham, Paige was first. And they took her to a side room, and then they heard Paige screaming. Break aside here. That must be a terrifying moment. You can imagine that you're going through customs. This is the magic moment. You either get through or you don't. Paige goes first. Boy, did she draw the short straw there. God, if someone had told me you go first, I was like, no, 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 no. You go first. Ladies first. Paige went first. They took her to a side room, and the others heard Paige screaming. At that point, she considered ditching the bags. This is Tasia. She considered ditching the bags, but they decided to both go ahead, and then they were pulled aside too. Well, well, well. The transcript that was read out was aggressive, and Tasia kept saying she's given the police more than she should have done, and she's got too much to lose, and she shouldn't have been in this situation. When asked what she means about too much to lose, she said because her dad is American, she has dual citizenship. On top of that, because her dad works for the military, she has the automatic ability to go to any country with a military base. Now, Person X obviously looked this up. It's not true. I know it's not true. Just because you're attached to the military and US military have various bases all over, it doesn't mean you have any right to go there at all. So nice try, Tasia, but you don't get special consideration for that at all. Now then, talking about special consideration, there's an element here that surprised me, and it's the element of coercion, because I'm about to read how Paige, Tasia, and I guess Jaden, or Paige and Tasia, started to go down the route of coercion. They were coerced into doing this. It sounds like a good defense tactic. Yeah, we did it. Well, we were forced to do it. Coercion. Listen to this. One of the defense barristers presented the idea that they were coerced into going ahead with the packages, even when they started to have doubts. Now, to support this, apparently, in the hotel room where the bag swap was carried out, they were told that they would only get their £3,000 each if they got through, and they would all be driven to an address in Luton from Birmingham, and that's where they would swap the bags back. So what I take from, I'm breaking aside here, what I take from the bag swap is that their actual bags that they travelled to Thailand with would be returned to them once they had got through with the substances, with the drugs, and once that had all been completed in Luton, then their own bags that they travelled to Thailand with would be returned to them. The bag swap. Yeah, so what about that? The coercion thing. Yeah, you only get paid if you go all the way through the airport down to Luton and then we can settle up. And they were told, or else, and were all threatened. Paige was shown a picture of a baby, and that was her threat. The threat extended to the large, heavy suitcases they were made to carry in place of their own. So they knew that from that point, their only choice was to go ahead with it, or their family would get hurt. Now if that's true, that's a very compelling defense. Not long after, a ruling was sent through to one of the prosecution barristers that the defense of coercion would not be available to Paige or the others. Who the ruling came from, the basis wasn't made clear. Person X says here, I think it was left that they would need to stop the coercion point there and follow up separately. So, like Person X, I'm a bit confused about this, but it seems like message came down from the judge. I'm just reading between the lines, I'm not sure, but it seems like message came down from the judge that this whole coercion defense is not going to fly. And it could have been from previous testimony because we didn't have anyone there every day, of course. Or it could have been that, as Person X is suggesting, that whole defense might or could be allowed later, but not at this point. But anyway, the whole coercion thing, Paige is basically told, don't go down the coercion route. We're not going to allow you to do that. Now we go into the afternoon session. Witness B, the senior police manager in charge of strategic direction of the operation. Yes, we want to hear from him. This witness was quite heavily involved with the evidence side of things, in particular with the phones and compiling evidence together with someone specializing in the area. He was brought in 4 days after the 11 individuals were brought in for questioning on the evening of 9th of August 2024, I think. Procedure when phones seized. Yeah, this is all interesting stuff. The police officer explained that when the individuals were arrested at the airport, their phones would also be seized for information that remains on the phones. The phones are immediately put into airplane mode. So the police basically have a snapshot at that exact moment of information that remains on the phones. The reason for putting the phone into airplane mode is so that no one can access the device remotely to either add details or delete messages from the phone. See, someone like me didn't know that. I've seen on a phone airplane mode. Means nothing to me, but there we go. The defense asked for clarification on what he meant by information that remains. He explained that mostly people try to delete any incriminating messages that could provide evidence of what the intention and level of knowledge and involvement was. He also explained that the common misconception was that people thought once messages are deleted, then double deleted, then they are gone forever. In actual fact, they just become stored in different buckets or files that they then need to methodically access and go through separately. All right, I think we all get that when you delete something, it's never deleted. Recruiters. Now, who are these recruiters? Who are these people that are hiring these mules to do this work? Recruiters. Across the 11, we're talking about the 11 smugglers, two main accounts and mainly Signal used. I had never heard of Signal. It's something like WhatsApp, I think. It's a messaging app. Now, one recruiter goes by the name True Geordie. Wow. On analysis, this originated from an account based in Finland, would you believe? On review, the decision was taken not to pursue the account in Finland. The reason being that the 11 individuals made it a lot more resource intensive than they wanted. Okay, and the other account, Viking. On analysis, again, this originated from an account in Finland. Scope. The defence barristers wanted to understand why only the 11 plus the 6 picked up from Luton were focused on, and why not the recruiters and higher up the hierarchy who could contact and recruit many more. In other words, the defence asking, why are you picking on these 11 poor, know-nothing, innocent smugglers when it looks like through your different phone forensic analysis here, you could have gone for the big guys. Why did you not? A good question. Why did you not? The defense lawyer explained Tasia had already explained many times it was Jordan that recruited her. And also Jordan could be traced back to his place of residence in East Ham, another recruiter's place of residence in Seven Sisters. Well, hello, some of us, I'm breaking aside now. Hello, some of us are saying, here we go, East London. And if you remember reading where all 11 were from, I think one was Dagenham area. Here we have East Ham. There's an East London connection. Not all of them, but a small group of them. The police strategy manager explained that although Tasia may think that's the next step in the link, on their review of the phone data and other information, the hierarchy within the organised group involved a couple of steps between Tasia and Jordan, and then between Tasia and the ultimate account in Finland. In addition, he said it's not as easy as sending someone over from the NCA. They would need to contact each country formally in writing to request access to phone data, which they may or may not provide, and then there may be further restrictions. Therefore, the probability of the time invested to arrive at a successful outcome, in addition to taking a long time, the chances of a successful outcome would be heavily reduced. In other words, it's so bloody complicated trying to get to the big fish here that, with limited resources, they decided not to bother with that. Also, contact with the 11 via Signal was at some point set up by someone called Zainab, not the recruiters. So the links between the recruiters were not direct throughout, and it would be too complicated to build up evidence on Zainab and so on. So the approach had to be on what they could get evidence on with greater certainty. Exactly. So they've got these phones, they've got these 11 smugglers, with greater certainty they can go to court. It does make sense to me that the big fish were ignored because the big fish, as always it seems, are too bloody remote, and it's complicated to try to spend resources to get them. Now, for this reason, the scope of the operation was limited to those found at Birmingham Airport, plus the 4, or was it 6, arrested in Luton. Passwords. Stick with me on this. The defence pointed out that Paige, Tasia, and Jaden had willingly provided their passwords after deleting as much as possible. Okay. They asked for clarification on what had happened with Ali, I think, but they were unclear on his last name, and another who had refused to provide their password. The police officer explained that they have oh, this is interesting, listen up. The police officer explained that they have technology that can access without the need for their permission. The technology can either work instantly, running through common passwords that would be tailored to the details of individuals, for example, family names and dates of birth, for example. And Ali's hadn't been the most straightforward to access, but all the same, they still managed to get access. Wow. So keep it in mind, if you are involved in this kind of operation, obviously you wouldn't be, but if ever you were to find yourself involved in this operation, sounds like the police these days do have a technology just to, find out your password. I don't know how many people out there have passwords that involve family names and dates of birth. Text messages. The defense also asked whether text messages have been reviewed for all messages which may present the defendants in a different light. In other words, are there text messages in there which might show the defendants are good people, nice people, innocent people? Police officer confirmed yes, all text messages were reviewed too. However, these days most people send messages via apps. In this operation it was mostly Signal, so this was the reason that Signal has been referred to so much, because that appears to be the main method by which messages were sent to each other in relation to this operation. WhatsApp. The defense also asked how the police could back up the time that someone had sent a message to Paige, as she had taken the SIM card out of the phone and only put it in after. So, the point at which she was sent the message wasn't the time that she had read the message. The police officer explained that in this case the message sent was in WhatsApp. WhatsApp has a clear trail on when the message is sent to the phone, which ties back to the time originally sent. It also clearly shows the time the message is opened and read. I'm sure you WhatsApp users know all this. So there is a clear trail on the time sent and the time the person receiving the message actually receives it. Other points, person X notes. Presentation, Jaden. Dressed immaculately in a suit and smart shoes, behavior impeccable. I don't think he said a word all day and no commotion from him. Paige, no Muslim dress at all. She was wearing light brown polyester trousers and loose fit jacket, loose pink pattern shirt, hair tied back casually. She was calm in the morning, and then when the decision came through that it was ruled that she didn't meet the criteria of being coercively controlled, she unraveled after this and then was aggressive and disruptive with Tasia in the afternoon. Final point. When I'm just interjecting here, when we hear person X say disruptive in the afternoon, this is another message from person X that during the break, person X was able to observe Tasia, Paige, I think maybe Jaden too, hanging around outside in the bathroom area, toilets area, and all that. And person X said in a previous message that, yeah, behavior was rather aggressive, disruptive, apart from Jaden. Jaden's cool, calm, and collected, it seems. Final point. I did ask the police officer when I spoke to them separately about when would the trials for the other individuals be. He explained that this was the last trial. They had another one in addition to this one that they could have combined but decided not to. They were with two individuals that were even more non-compliant, not turning up and so on, so they thought it was best to keep them separate. In addition, the rest of the 11 arrested at Birmingham Airport and the 6, but he kept saying 4, arrested in Luton, all accepted charges already without the need for a trial. And there the notes end. All right, so a long video, and if you're not interested in what happens in trials connected with smuggling, not the most interesting video for you. But for those of you interested in, yes, how do these things get discovered? How does the evidence get presented? What is involved in all that? I found that very, very interesting. So once again, hats off to Lee, the follower that went there initially. Big hats off. myself, and many, many thanks to Person X that took the time to go, when possible, to the court to amass those notes and to give us that key information, especially on the afternoon that pertained to the police presenting their evidence. Let's leave it there. More possibly, no, probably tomorrow. So hasta luego, adios, hasta la vista, hasta mañana. See you next time.